Hello, Wonder. You won't be traveling past stars tonight, but deep into the pine mist heart of an old Slavic forest. Somewhere between one breath and the next, a single twig cracks, and suddenly a legend stirs awake. Here, winter doesn't. Just visit, it stays, lingers, listens, trees remember. Wolves move like forgotten lullabies. And behind every wooden stove, a tiny house spirit, the Domovoi grumbles softly, judging your floor-sweeping habits with ancient precision. The snow sings if you're patient enough. The silence answers if you're quiet enough. So dim the lights. Settle in by an open window, if you can. Let your thoughts curl like wood smoke. Tonight, we'll follow the hush of velvet-pawed wolves. Hear the whisper behind the stove, and feel the frozen river hold its breath beneath us. If these slow journeys through myth and memory help you rest, feel free to subscribe or simply drop a comment with your time and location. Who knows? The next stream may begin from there. Now. A twig just cracked beneath the pines, and we're already walking. Asterisk, you might not expect a single crackling twig snapped somewhere in a mist-soaked pine forest on a winter evening to carry the weight of centuries of Slavic superstition, but here we are. The branch breaks again, in memory, as though the trees themselves are rehearsing, each pine needle rehearsing, each little cell of resin practicing its part in the night's unhurried orchestra. Long ago, villagers believed such sounds were tiny telegrams from the lushy, those tall, leafy guardians of the woods who could shrink to the size of a blade of grass or stretch like a cathedral spire, depending on mood and maybe barometric pressure. Scholars debated whether the snap signaled invitation or warning, but no one debated the pace. Everything in these forests moves with the viscosity of cold honey. Even wolves, padded in velvet silence, set each paw down as though afraid to disturb. The snow's private dream. Somewhere between footfall and echo, history finds space to loiter, yawn, and mumble stray facts no one asked for. Asterisk. The scent this evening impossibly specific mixes birch fire, distant juniper, and a whiff of iron that might be a frozen stream. Under the crusted snow, our ancestors cataloged such aromas the way modern people collect Wi-Fi passwords. They swore you could tell a friendly forest from a hostile one by the sweetness of its frost. A polite frost smells faintly of rye bread. A malicious frost carries a sharper, almost metallic tinge, the sort that reminds you of licking a 9-volt battery as a kid, though they obviously never did that. Somewhere overhead, an owl rearranges its feathers with the fussiness of a librarian shifting volumes a millimeter to the left. Every soft rustle invites another micro-legend. Some said owls were simply the daytime souls of night watchmen, granted overtime in avian form so the village could afford one less guard. That fact never convinced accountants, but folklore rarely. Balances its books inside a log cabin tucked between fir trunks. The stove glows like an orange-eyed creature trying to behave itself. Yet everyone knows a Domovoi lives just behind it, no bigger than a cat, beard ash gray, temperament dependent on how recently the floor was swept. He mutters tonight in a language that sounds suspiciously like the creak of an old tea kettle. Lid. Household records kept by babushkas with the diligence of modern social media managers list every Domovoi complaint for 2 centuries. Soot left unswept, common. Socks left to roast on stovetop, unforgivable, and once existential. Boredom due to insufficient storytelling after supper. To appease him, families offered the first spoonful of porridge straight into the fire, effectively feeding a spirit through a glowing brick mouth. Some historians argue this practice inflated oat prices region-wide. Others note that oat merchants financed most of those historians. You may draw your own quiet conclusions while your eyelids consider an early hibernation. The whisper behind the stove deepens, a sound like someone turning pages in a damp book. The Domovoi is rumored to keep ledgers of everything borrowed and never returned, knitting needles, patience, small compliments. On stormy nights, he recalculates the interest rate on each lapse of courtesy. One legend insists he introduced compound interest to Eastern Europe centuries before bankers thought of it, but only an emotional currency. If you forget to say goodnight to the hearth, your debt grows exponentially by dawn. It's a wonder anyone slept at all in medieval times, yet they did, often in one long winter block called dead sleep, sometimes waking briefly at midnight to stoke embers, chat, and perhaps renegotiate terms with the invisible auditor grumbling. In the corner, that tradition faded when kerosene lamps arrived, maybe because Domovoi found their own reflections unsettling in the glass. Beyond the cabin, the world adjusts itself into song. Snowflakes land on the frozen river with a tick so soft it feels imagined, yet together they compose a tune scholars have tried to notate since at least 1583. Father Dragon of Novgorod attempted a 5-line staff, concluded it needed 64 lines, then gave up and doodled spirals that suspiciously resemble modern sleep tracking graphs. The river underneath, thick as cathedral glass, hums a bass note when the wind angles across its length just so. Traders once used that resonance as a kind of GPS. A deeper pitch suggested they'd straight toward the deep channel. A brighter one promised safe crossing. You can picture fur-clad figures towing sledges of wax and honey, stopping mid-river to hold their breath until the ice vibrated the correct chord, something like the lowest note on an organ played. In the next village over, underwater at dawn, they called it the snow song, though it is mostly silence escorted by a single vowel. Occasional wolves accompany in perfect soft pod rhythm, tails swaying like metronomes set to resting heart. Rate. If the Domovoi is the house accountant, the wolves are the auditors of the plain, sniffing the ledger for discrepancies in fear or bravado, but billing in goosebumps instead of coin. A traveler's lantern flickers on the riverbank, oil thickening in the cold like reluctant molasses. He writes in a diary made of thin birch bark lighter than paper, less likely to dissolve if you drop it in slush. The entry is rivetingly dull. Temperature, bootstrap condition, number of footsteps since last tea. Yet later historians will mine these notes for insight, quoting with breathless emphasis the line, "Snow at dusk smelt faintly of apples." Whole dissertations defend and refute that assertion. Did he carry dried apples in his pack? Did some unseen orchard spirit pass by? Or did cold simply remind him of forgotten harvests? Students lose entire winters debating, stacking footnotes. Like split logs? Somewhere the Domovoi chuckles, having invented academic peer review centuries early by sneaking counter-arguments into margins overnight. Toward morning, the sky transitions from ink to diluted charcoal. In the bluish gloom of forest rooster, yes, roosters roam here. Escaped from farms generations ago and now fluent in pine etiquette clears his throat. It is not the loud cock-a-doodle-doo of barnyards, but a considerate, down-quilted murmur, as if he's announcing dawn only to those on the brink of waking anyway. Folklore credits him with signaling treaty renewals between forest spirits and mortal villages each day. If he's late, moss sprites grow bold and rearrange footpaths out of spite. Cartographers still blame misplaced crossroads on overslept roosters, a defense marginally more plausible than blaming the Earth's mischievous curvature. The rooster's breath feathers into the cold, momentarily painting what looks like cursive script in the air. Perhaps it is the snow song's closing signature, perhaps just poultry exhalation. Either way, daylight edges over the treetops like someone slowly lifting a blanket, careful not to wake the still dozing wolves, stretched along the riverbank like patches of shadow, refuse to leave. Inside the cabin, the Domovoi yawns a sound similar to a coal settling and decides the household performed adequately tonight. No dishes shattered, no doors slammed against the weather's tantrum. He files the observation in a tiny ledger bound with spider, silk, and owl feathers, then curls behind the stove, beard steaming faintly. The stove itself purrs like an elderly cat, embers rearranging into memories of last summer's pine cones. Outside, snow absorbs everything, from the rooster's muffled crow to the creak of sap inside trees considering spring. Historians will later insist that on mornings like this, deals were made with destiny, kingdoms set on courses. But the forest knows better. Nothing world-changing happens at dawn beyond the ordinary miracle of light returning. And so it does, filling every frozen footprint, highlighting each twig broken hours earlier, revealing precisely nothing urgent. If you're somehow still listening, I commend your endurance. The Leshy would award you a pine cone of diligence, the Domovoi perhaps a single ember of commendation. Feel free to subscribe or simply let your thoughts drift like fine snow into untroubled heaps. The rooster offers one last polite syllable. The wolves sigh into their scarves of fur, and the snow song quiets into plain daylight hush. There will be more twigs to crack, more ledgers to balance, more birch bark diaries to speculate about, but none of that matters right now. The forest, kindly indifferent, invites you to rest, and so the story, still half awake, trundles softly into silence. You might not expect the gentle crease along the edge of an 18th century letter to reveal anything more thrilling than the writer's preference for stationery. Yet collectors insist entire worlds hide in that slim fold. If you're still awake by the time we reach the remarkable year when London briefly ran out of sealing wax, an event that caused neither riots nor songs, please feel free to subscribe, though a drowsy nod will serve just as well. Imagine a candlelit desk in a drafty Georgian hallway, the flame wobbling as though politely coughing, while a clerk with unexaggerated dreams coaxes wool rag, paper into shapes as predictable as Tuesday. He begins by warming his fingers over a lamp, not for comfort, but to prevent brittle paper from cracking. The Royal Post Office circulated a pamphlet on proper finger temperature in 1749, neither clammy nor cold, approximating the flank of a resting horse. Historians debate whether anyone verified horses, yet a margin note in one surviving. Copy records the clerk's own hand felt satisfactorily equine that morning. The first fold, called the parish bend, brings the bottom edge up just enough to hide a line of cordiality. I remain, "Sir, you're obedient," while saving ink on a second sheet. Postmasters charged by sheet count, not by weight, which made brevity and economic virtue and envelope artistry a quiet rebellion. Watch the sheet breathe as it's turned sideways. The clerk adds a diagonal tuck, a maneuver nicknamed the sailor's napkin because naval officers perfected it on months-long voyages, folding love notes to sweethearts in Portsmouth with the same precision they gave to rigging. A captain of Et's Indomitable once bragged he could fold a dispatch during a gale without spilling his sherry. The note survived. His sherry did not, and that is why museum glass now protects a water-stained triangle of paper that still carries a ghost of salt. Beneath the fold, wax waits in a shallow brass spoon, faintly smelling of pine resin and distant bees. When warmed just to the point of sulkiness, never bubbling, the wax strips onto the paper like a sunset deciding where to land. A soft stamp follows, bearing no coat of arms, merely the clerk's initials scratched in pewter. Personal seals were tolerated so long as they remained unpretentious. One ambitious junior embossed a griffin and was reprimanded for heraldic exuberance. Later, guidances advised seals to pick vegetables, as they were unlikely to incite jealousy. Thus, entire decades of correspondence reached Edinburgh or Bath, secured by modest impressions of carrots and turnips. Modern reenactors sometimes choose asparagus for variety, but complain the stalk proves hard to distinguish once the wax cools. Somewhere in another wing of the post office, An accounts man tallies how many carrot seals traveled north last quarter. He does this not from necessity, but from the soothing tick of quill on ledger. If ink blots occur, he labels them Isle of Wight and draws a tiny coastline around each blot, in what may be the first cartographic joke of the Postal Service. A senior supervisor once suggested charging extra for archipelagos, but the idea drifted off like steam in a corridor and was never seen again. Back at the desk, the clerk slips the finished letter into the outgoing stack, where it joins. Dozens of origami cousins, some with double pockets, some with cunning locks requiring the recipient to slice a tab, a tiny act of violence that nevertheless thrilled. A lady in York kept every tab she ever severed in a silver sugar bowl, proof that even trivial scraps can feel like trophies in a quiet life. When she died, executors counted 1,172 paper nubs, and no one dared throw them away, so they still reside in the archives catalogued as Miss R.W.'s Confetti of Days. Scholars sometimes request the box simply to listen to the hush of the pieces settling, which they describe as a polite applause. Carriages arrive at dusk, horses snort. Into canvas nose bags, scented faintly of oatmeal and civic duty. Each leather pouch of mail is tied with string of regulation thickness, 1/80th of an inch, a measurement enforced by passing the twine through a brass ring. If it fit too easily, the rope was deemed frivolous. If it snagged, extravagant. The ring survives in the British Postal Museum, labeled Gauge, String, Moral. Visitors rarely linger, yet that ring once decided the fate of poetry too thick. A string delayed Byron's early verses by 3 damp weeks, causing an entire flirtation to fizzle before it flowered. History could owe its quieter tone to a bureaucrat's brass halo. The road, the mail coach rattles over cobblestones, each jolt stamping the wax anew. The guard, perched atop like a crow in a tricorn hat, times his yawns with milestones. 1 yawn per mile, a practice set to keep the lungs from freezing. He carries a blunderbuss filled not with shot, but with paper pellets bearing the Crown's warning seal should highwaymen appear. He might fire official notices of reproach at them, a tactic never tested. Those same postal pellets, harmless as dried peas, were later repurposed as packing for fragile parcels, proving no idea in the service was ever truly wasted at a coaching inn. Letters rest in wooden cubbies, smelling of ale and tallow. A sleepy barmaid once rearranged the cubbies alphabetically by fragrance when candles burned low. Lavender-tinged notes near the chimney, smoke-tinged near the door. Patrons collected correspondence guided by nose rather than name, and the mix-ups produced 3 marriages, 2 business partnerships, and a brief regional craze for menthol ink. The postmaster noted the error, filed it under experiments, and neither disciplined nor praised the barmaid, demonstrating the service's commitment to measured neutrality. Dawn finds our original letter delivered to a modest townhouse. Its carrot seal intact, its folds crisp as the day they were born. The recipient, still lacing boots, holds the paper to a window to decode watermarks. A unicorn for mid-grade mills, a thistle for premium. He nods at the unicorn, pleased enough. Opening the folds is a ritual of reverse engineering each crease. Teaches him something of the sender's temperament. A shy diagonal means reluctance. A bold horizontal suggests coffee was involved. Decades later, when handwriting fades, archivists will focus entirely on these structural hints, like archaeologists, deducing worship practices from post holes. One graduate student built a typology of hesitant tucks, so comprehensive it required 12 volumes, which she later used as sterilizers in her flat. Proving scholarship is sometimes literally foundational. The wax wafer, now cracked, drops onto a saucer. It will be saved in an envelope labeled empties alongside dozens of other seals, forming a miniature spectrum from pale beeswax to oxblood red. Victorian children strung such empties into necklaces for toy soldiers, believing the colors conferred ranks. A carrot might outrank a turnip, but never a beet. This unspoken hierarchy filtered subtly into playground politics, shaping alliances and enmities as surely as any treaty. If you lean close, you might still hear faint clinks of wax medallions bumping in a dusty toy chest, rehearsing childhood debates about who would guard the fort, usually the bee. And so the paper, now unfolded, lies flat upon a small escritoire. Its purpose to announce nothing more dramatic than the safe arrival of 3 crates of lampblack, fulfilled at last. The recipient blots a reply with sand, shapes 3 cautious folds, and reaches for fresh wax, this time embossed with, wait for it, a parsnip. Historians of root vegetable heraldry will one day cite this as evidence of a quiet rivalry, but here and now it is merely a new droplet cooling on parchment, while the sender listens to sparrows outside, counting chirps as though they were ticks of an invisible metronome. If your eyes remain open, perhaps note how every mundane crease, every dull seal, becomes a small-time capsule of human fussiness. But do not strain yourself. Allow the coach to rumble away again, the ledgers to close, the wax to cloud and soften like icing on a forgotten cake. Somewhere a clerk warms his fingers to the ideal horse flank temperature, ready to begin another letter that matters only in the slow, soothing way drizzle matters to moss. Let the folds narrow into darkness, and let your thoughts, like those tidily tucked papers, settle into silence for the night. You might not expect a rusty hinge on a 12th century monastery bell to reveal anything livelier than the temper of old iron. Yet monks once kept whole ledgers on the way a bell sighed when nudged at dawn. If you're still awake by the time we reach the thrilling episode of Brother Said removing spider webs from the clapper, feel entirely at liberty to subscribe, though nodding off halfway through the cobweb would be the more traditional response. Picture, if you will, an abbey, tucked beyond hedgerows, gray stone warming slowly under clouds the color of dishwater. Matins is hours away, and the bell, enormous but unhurried, waits in its timber cage like a cow that refuses to chew until it hears a familiar song. A novice in sandals too large climbs the wooden ladder, counting each rung because the rule of Saint Benedict recommends mindfulness even in ascent. He mutters 1 mercy, 2 mercies, until the count reaches 44 mercies, a respectable haul before breakfast. At the platform, he greets the bell not by name naming bells. Was considered dangerously affectionate, but by weight. Peace upon you, 217 stone. He knocks the rim with his knuckle, listening for the tone that scholars later labeled faintly asparagus. Medieval acoustics jargon included flavors. There were notes of barley, notes of plum, and on grim winter days, notes of porridge left. Out in the rain, he examines the oak, that stout beam dark with centuries of candle soot, making sure the iron hoops known as angels' belts remain snug. A loose belt once slipped in 1193, sending the bell into a gentle swirl so slow it took 3 days to notice the tilt. Chronicles recorded nothing dramatic, only that vespers sounded politely askew, like a choir clearing its throat sideways. Since then, monks measured the belts with a strip of vellum marked not in inches but an Avenue Maria's. A proper fit equaled 5 avenue lengths exactly, never 6. One chronicler joked that a devout monk with longer prayers could inadvertently tighten a whole tower, but statistical silence suggests the joke stayed on parchment dot and oil crock weights. Nearby, goose fat blended with beeswax in wintertime. Recipe marginalia warns, omit time in Advent to avoid excess cheerfulness. Yet archaeologists scraping residues from ancient pots find time in every season, proving monks bent rules when bells squeaked. The novice dips a wooden paddle, paints the axle's modest shoulders, and pauses to appreciate how the herb smells of warm bread crust. He records the procedure on a wax tablet, noting wind direction, west, loaf bearing, and mood of sparrows, incipient gossip. These details, he believes, please whatever saint guards rotating objects, a saint no longer in calendars, but who must exist if carts never complained. Below, in the belfry's dust lace dark, a senior brother tests the rope. It feels like coarse hair braided by someone sincere yet distracted. Fibers come from flax harvested in a field that floods each spring, so the rope retains a memory of river mud, making it swell during Pentecost humidity. To counter this, monks stored spare ropes under sacks of salt cod. Fish dryness, they claimed, taught humility to hemp. Records show only one rope ever rebelled, snapping during lauds and dropping like a startled snake. The prior blessed the fragments and repurposed them as shoelaces, creating the quietest walking shoes in Christendom. High tide of maintenance comes with the striking of a tuning fork carved from deer antler. The fork is struck against the bells, waist producing a chord so low it squats in the nave for a heartbeat before crawling out through cloister arches. Early tourists, arriving centuries later, will dismiss that note as mere metal fatigue, but the Chronicle registers it as Sanctus Minor, a pitch reserved for mornings when fog blankets the orchard like unrolled parchment. A micro hug for anyone. Still awake? Once, fog lingered 7 days, and the bell's voice deepened until geese answered it, circling the tower as though summoned to confession, satisfied. The novice wipes the clapper with linen, removing soot rings that map every toll. Since Candlemas, he finds a white feather stuck to the iron proof. He decides that an angel visited during the night, though more prosaic minds suspect an owl. In the margin of his tablet, he sketches the feather, labeling it celestial maybe. Historians will later misread the note as celestial Malbec, sparking a brief hunt for a lost French grape cultivated by monks. Only much later will someone parse the handwriting and disappoint the enologists. Such are the footnotes that keep doctoral students pleasantly occupied while others sleep. Downstairs, the sacrist checks an hourglass filled not with sand but with crushed eggshells which flow more demurely and resemble snow when lamplight strikes. He flips the glass and notes the time. 2 recitations of Psalm 51 plus a swallow of watered beer. This is how they synchronize the first bell of the day, a cadence so dependable locals set ovens by it. Bakers, half dreaming, wait for the note that sounds like distant barley to slide loaves into embers. One baker in 1307 recorded that when the bell missed its cue by a breath, every crust split down the spine as though gasping. He sent a politely accusatory scone to the abbey. The monks, equally polite, sent back extra time grease. The rope pulls at last. 217 stone leans outward like a sleepy giant stretching one shoulder. The first strike resonates through oak beams, stirring tucked-away swallows who chirp reprimands before resettling. Vibration travels along mortise, joints, through quarry-chilled stone, until it reaches the chapter house floor where jars of ink quiver, drawing accidental ripples across today's accounts of cabbage yield. A scribe calmly draws ships around each ripple, converting tremors into nautical marginalia. Here a galley, there a walrus of improbable size. Later researchers will cite the walrus as northern trade influence, never guessing it began as whimsy on a vibrating table. Between peals, the novice listens for echo intervals called mercy seconds, the hush where one could, in theory, confess. A minor sin to the resonance itself and feel absolved. Layfolk believe the bell carried such whispers upward, filing them somewhere between clouds. Whether monks shared that superstition is unclear. What is clear is the novice softly admits he overbuttered yesterday's bread slice, and the returning echo seems forgiving, perhaps because stone walls prefer sins they can digest. Another micro hook. In 1422, lightning struck the bell yet, failed to crack it, choosing instead to split its reflection in the rain barrel below. The chronicle solemnly notes, image sundered, object spared, a sentence scholars quote whenever discussing resilience or puddles. To prevent further skyly rebukes, monks riveted a small lead cross atop the bell, so thin it wavered like grass in wind. Lead, being malleable, bent each season until it resembled a question mark, inadvertently turning the bell into a permanent query about weather, souls, and metallurgy. By mid-morning, maintenance concludes. Tools return to a chest whose lock squeaks in B flat, thereby harmonizing with the bell's after ring. This coincidence pleases the prior, who hears providence in compatible squeaks. The novice descends, counting mercies in reverse to ground. Himself, on the refectory wall, hangs a board listing duties. Today, someone must shoo pigeons from the north transept, a task the novice accepts with meek optimism, unaware that pigeons admire time grace and will stage a mild siege. But that is a yawn for another evening. Before leaving, he pats the bell's wooden frame, a farewell of palm on seasoned oak, and the timber answers with a warmth that only centuries of quiet labor can store. Outside, courtyard stones are pale with frost, and distant sheep bells, smaller cousins, tinkle like the main bell's dream fragments scattered across fields. Villagers hearing that great, slow note know nothing of goose fat polish or angel's belts. They simply measure time by its calm insistence, arranging lives the way bees arrange hexagons. If your lids grow heavy now, let them. Think of that. Vast brown's throat humming in darkness, of ropes smelling faintly of fish in riverbeds, of monks mapping reverberations the way gardeners map rose beds, patiently, pointlessly, lovingly. Allow the mercy seconds between heartbeats to widen until they are no longer seconds, but quiet plains where even bells travel softly. And above all, let the echo find you forgiving, as it forgave a novice with too much butter on his bread. You might not expect a single gaslit street lamp in 1872 to keep fuller diaries than most traveling poets. Yet iron columns once enjoyed page after page of ink devoted to how coyly their flames leaned in cross winds. If you're still awake, by the time I reach the riveting account of Lamp No. 47's encounter with a lost hedgehog, feel free to subscribe or simply fold into sleep like a lantern hood closing for the night. The hours that deep violet between day's last biscuit, crumb, and the first star. Along a cobbled road outside York, the lamplighter appears, coat buttoned to the chin, hefting a ladder that squeaks the way a mouse sighs when it finds no cheese. His task begins with a courtesy tap on the post an old guild habit meant to wake whatever spirit oversees hinges, and then he unhooks a narrow volume from a bracket, the illumination ledger. Each lamp keeps its own. Lamp No. 42 bears a ledger bound in eelskin because eel, according to municipal superstition, repels rust. He records the date, moon phase, and the exact hue of twilight as judged against a swatch card printed in 16 varieties of melancholy blue. Tonight rates bleakish. He notes soot depth on the mantle and barleycorns, precisely 3.5. A micro hook for the half alert. The barleycorn measurement survived longer in lamp keeping than in shoe sizing, mostly because barleycorns were plentiful in public works teapots, having drifted in from sandwich crusts. Ledger duties done, he ascends, rung by careful rung, counting not numbers but short prayers to St. Lucy, patroness of lamplighters, filing each with the silent confidence of someone who knows saints rarely audit. At the lamp head he lifts the glass pane, careful not to clink. Clinking invites chip cracks called night tears. He trims the cotton wick, removing exactly the breadth of a sixpence, though coins are never used as gauges because brass excites static, which makes flames shiver in embarrassing ways. The trimmings drop into a pocket tin labeled odds and soots collected, later to stuff drafty keyholes in City Hall. With a brass key, he opens the valve. Gas hisses like distant applause. A flint igniter sparks, and suddenly the mantle blooms. Creamy orange, settling into a modest pear shape said to resemble the belly of a well-fed thrush. Thrushes, one inspector wrote, produce the most respectable silhouettes. The lamplighter lingers long enough to watch for first flutter, that moment when the new flame trembles toward either saintliness or mischief. Saintly flames stay. Upright, mischievous ones flirt sideways and blacken the chimney cap. He decides this one is devout and signs the ledger with a small drawing of a straight arrow. In later years, historians will decode lamp ledgers as though they were maritime logs, debating whether arrows truly indicated virtue or merely wind direction. The debate, spanning 7 conferences, resolves nothing but provides thousands of sleepy footnotes for evenings like this. Hours pass. Midnight's drape settles over gutters, and the lamp, now humming faintly, attracts a lone hawk moth dusted in silvery powder. The creature circles the glass, mapping heat with soft-feathered antennae. According to entomology minutes filed by a curious clerk in 1881, moth landings were logged because the city sought cheap thermometers. More moths meant warmer glass. On this chilly night, only one moth attends, suggesting modest consumption of gas and therefore fiscal virtue. The watchman on patrol writes moth count singular, full of purpose, in his own notebook, a detail that will confuse accountants after the century turns. Beneath the lamp, the road reveals its secrets: wagon grooves filled with last week's, drizzled hoof prints from a milk horse that worries every Thursday, and somewhere a lost button that will stay lost until someone invents reflective paint. The watchman tests the post's stability by leaning his shoulder into it, listening for the creak called iron yawn. Tonight it yawns politely, indicating only ordinary fatigue. He enters this into a side ledger titled Pose and Posture, a volume devoted solely to whether lamps list drunkenly toward bakery windows. One page describes Lamp No, 19's lifelong desire to eavesdrop on pastry smells, but officials adjudged the lean acceptable so long as buns remained within 8 inches of sniff range. Toward 3:30 a.m., the gas inspector arrives. With equipment resembling a traveling alchemist's kit, glass tubes, a water column, and a brass whistle for scaring off dogs who think tubes are bones. He taps the pipe's coupling net. Resonance tells him whether spiders built nests inside. A truly clogged pipe rings with a muffled thrum, akin to a cushion complaining. Tonight it answers clear as a small bell. He records pipe note. Respectable. He measures flow by submerging an inverted jar in the horse trough. Bubbling commences, counting seconds per bubble. Each bubble, municipal manuals insist, should last the syllable span of God save our gracious queen. On frosty nights, inspectors shorten to God save, acknowledging the cold. Watching bubbles, he sips lukewarm chicory coffee from a tin cup once containing boot polish. The cup bears a chipped rim shaped like the coast of Cornwall, a geography. Joke he silently appreciates whenever lips touch Land's End. He jots coffee temperature on a scrap. Archivists will later puzzle over why gas stats share space with beverage thermometry, some proposing that coffee absorption mirrored gas uptake, an elegant but entirely accidental hypothesis. Meanwhile, the lamp's flame whispers against the glass, producing wave patterns of light on nearby shutters, rolling like candlelit seas. A black cat walks through, becoming striped fish, then solid cat again. Residents, half dreaming, suspect. Burglars when they see shadows swim, never realizing it's merely maritime geometry born of gas-dot pre-dawn arrives in brittle increments. Frost feathers cobbles. The lamp responds by shrinking its flame slightly, a behavior lamplighters call the polite recoil. Inspectors once placed copper rulers against the mantle to measure recoil, but abandoned the practice after discovering rulers froze to glass. Instead, they learned to judge recoil by eye, claiming it mirrored the bow modest librarians give when stamping returns. If you remain awake, consider that librarians and lamps share an unspoken union, both tasked with guarding. Quiet illumination. The city briefly floated the idea of library lamp, hybrids tiny shelves below each post for pamphlets on manure management, yet abandoned it when pamphlets turned rowdy and wind dot at 5:15. The lamplighter returns. Ladder in tow, its rungs now colder than cathedral bells. He ascends, once more counting prayers. At the top, he pinches the valve closed. The flame sighs out, leaving a plum afterglow on glass. He waits 3 beats, the officially recommended cooling mercy, before wiping chimney walls with a soot. Cloth. The cloth graduates from sparkled night to opaque midnight, a transformation lovingly documented in ledgers as cloth darkening event. He weighs collected soot in a brass scoop. 8 drams, perfect for the city's soap making. Side program. Yes, soap from lamp soot advertised later as urban dust cleanser. Although buyers preferred lavender dot, he chalks today's tally of drams onto the post base. Tiny white numerals unnoticed by most passers-by. Only children count them, inventing stories that lamp posts secretly learn arithmetic. One child in 1894 copied the numbers onto his slate each morning. Years later, he became a professor of statistics, attributing his career to those soot sums. Less lamps, without meaning to, seated sciences brighter than their own glow. The lamplighter locks the ledger back on its bracket. Before climbing down, he peers east, where sky thins like watered ink. He nods to lamp No. 42, murmuring, "Rest well, old thrush belly." A farewell as customary as bowing to altar rails. On the ground, he folds the ladder. Hinges click a code only lamplighters understand. 2 short, 1 long. That says inspection complete, hazard none. He walks away, heel taps echoing like tiny pendulums, leaving the street to morning's gradual palette. Ash pearl, then timid gold. Soon bakers will lift shutters, and shop boys will sweep yesterday's gossip into gutters. To them, the unlit lamp is simply daytime furniture. They won't think of eelskin ledgers, barleycorn soot, or a moth thermometry. Yet every evening, those rituals will resume, uncelebrated, infinitely careful, a lullaby in brass and flame. If your own eyelids feel heavier than mantles cooling in dawn air, surrender. Imagine the faint scent of gas mingling with fog, the soft clunk of a ledger closing, the street holding its breath between darkness and day. Drift there where even history yawns politely and settles into hush. You might not think a single frond of maidenhair could set London dinner guests quietly swooning into their soup. Yet here we are, brushing the gentle underside of the Victorian fern craze, that hushed decade when polite society measured status. In spores. If you're still awake by the time I reach the etiquette rules for passing a potted polypody at tea, you're welcome to subscribe or merely drift sideways like a spore on evening air. I shan't take attendance. Picture 1851, a parlor lit by whale oil lamps wrapped in lace sleeves so the flame won't glare at ladies' spectacles. On the sideboard rests an object of exquisite mildness, a Wardian case, its glass panes fogged with the breath of 6 tender ferns. Hosts gather their guests around as though unveiling a newborn. Someone produces a tiny brass hygrometer, no larger than a walnut, to confirm the humidity inside. The needle quivers at perfectly moist, a reading set to soothe nerves and upset accountants who worry about wallpaper mildew. Behind the hiss of the samovar, a low cluck of approval floats because a healthy fern can. According to an 1853 gardening manual, banish melancholy in precisely 8 minutes. The manual's footnote admits the timing was tested on a cousin prone to sighing over lost umbrellas. A valet enters carrying silver tongs designed exclusively for repositioning fronds without insulting their posture. Each tongue tip is padded. With swans down, swans, gardeners insisted, understand grace. He lifts a single leafy finger, revealing the rich chocolate soil beneath. Observers lean closer, inhaling the damp aroma of peat, reminiscent of far-off logs and the underside of library carpets during rain. Someone whispers the Latin name, Adiantum Capillus Veneris, as though incanting a lullaby. In that era, to mispronounce Latin before a fern was deemed as gauche as wearing mismatched gloves at the opera. Plants, it was believed, could wilt from embarrassment. A pamphlet titled Proper Modes of Address for Cryptogams warned that common names, like ladies' hair, might cause the more refined specimens to sulk and tangle. By 9:30, conversation drifts to spore trading. A gentleman removes a fold of black silk from his vest pocket and shakes it ever so gently. Cinnamon brown dust glimmers in lamplight. 40,000 spores give or take insomnia from a rare Tasmanian blechnum. The exchange rate, 2 nocturnal cup and saucer plants, slightly bruised, plus a promise to name any successful offspring after the donor's aunt. These arrangements fill diaries with entries such as Tuesday, obtained Aunt Millicent, vibrant but shy. Collectors keep ledgers listing not only genus and date, but the weather on the day of spore capture, because rumor holds that spores, collected under a waning moon, grow leaves shaped like quotation marks. No one verifies this. It is enough that it might be so. Outside the parlor, lamplighters mutter at the sight of fern hunters roaming city alleys at dawn, their skirts tucked into boots, baskets swinging like sleepy metronomes. They scour mousy walls for volunteer fronds and sometimes bread chimney sweeps to retrieve rogue specimens nesting in gutter cracks. One magistrate's report notes a duel almost occurred over a tiny hart's tongue found on a coal barge. The weapon proposed was sarcasm at 20 paces. But the combatants forgot the plan when one noticed a still rarer spleenwort near a drain pipe. Such is the soft drama of botany. Tempers flare, then cool beneath spores' pacifying spell. Midway through our evening, we wander into the conservatory, glass roof faintly pinging with autumn drizzle. Here, fern stoves brick boxes warmed by hot water pipes hum like cats napping under quilts. Each stove bears a brass nameplate, Chimera, Pegasus, slightly mythic titles intended to reassure ferns that greatness surrounds them. Gardeners in flannel aprons shuffle along the narrow paths, mist sprayers in hand. One pauses to polish condensation from a pane so the moon can peer in. Lunar beams, Victorians say, encourage symmetrical frond divisions. A micro hook for any listener still perched on wakefulness, symmetry, they believed, prevented the growth of rebellious sideways pinnae that hinted at bohemian habits. Further back, hidden behind a curtain of Boston fern, lies the spores, only. Library, a tall cabinet of shallow drawers lined with velvet. Opening a drawer reveals envelopes made from onion skin paper, each labeled, sealed with red wax, and signed by a curator whose handwriting is so light it could drift off the page. Among these is the legendary drawer 42, said to contain the spores of a fern extinct since the age of plesiosaurs. Experts debate whether spores can survive that long, but no one opens the drawer for fear of disappointment, and also because the curator mislaid the key while mesmerized by a particularly curly fiddlehead. Losing keys to quiet mysteries becomes a hobby in such circles. Across town, in humbler homes, the fern mania adopts thriftier forms. Housewives arrange cut fronds behind portraits, believing the leaves absorb discontent and exhale patience. Chimney sweeps tuck fronds into their cap brims for lockthos that quickly dyes them midnight, making the leaves resemble exotic feathers that never existed. Children press ferns between blotting sheets, then place them under mattresses so dreams will feature forests instead of arithmetic. An 1860s children's magazine prints a rhyme: sleep where the fern has kissed your nose, sums dissolve like melting snows. Teachers collectively sigh, but cannot compete with botany propaganda. Near midnight, we eavesdrop on a fern soiree in a seaside glasshouse. Sea fog slips through door gaps, beating on fronds like miniature pearls. The hostess has hired a quartet to play nothing but slow polkas and a minor key music thought to replicate the vibration. Frequency of forest shade. Guests sway, sipping fern punch, rainwater sugar, and shavings of hartshorn jelly, garnished with a single unfurled leaf that tickles the upper lip. Etiquette dictates one must not chew the garnish. To bite a fern is to awaken ancient spirits, who prefer quiet. Instead, the leaf is returned to the glass and saluted before departure. A gesture so subtle onlookers cannot tell whether a salute has occurred, preserving modesty. Somewhere beyond town limits, the practice of fern rustling has already begun. Country estates girdle their gardens with polite fences, yet nocturnal collectors scale them using ladders padded with felt to muffle steps. They carry lanterns veiled in green silk so the light won't startle nightingales. Startled birds might call constables. Rustlers wrap freshly pilfered fronds in damp flannel and sprint home, later pressing them into albums titled with grand flourish, specimens acquired under the compassion of the moon. Courts rarely prosecute because evidence wilts into anonymity. A stolen fern looks much like any other after 3 days. Judges reportedly keep potted ferns on their benches to remind all parties of fleeting vanity. Approaching dawn, our parlor returns. Candles gutter, leaving small wax puddles shaped like crumpled letters. The wording case stands serene, glass, now clear, as if the ferns have exhaled all clouds. Guests, coats clasped, murmur farewells. Each receives a calling card printed with a tiny green silhouette of a frond invitations to next month's unveiling of a rumored blue fern, though critics insist the tint comes from indigo-tinted gaslight. The hostess closes the parlor door, pauses, and leans her forehead against cool mahogany, grateful the evening passed without anyone loudly confusing a pinna with a pinule. Botanical faux pas cling in social memory longer than ballroom gossip. She extinguishes lamps one by one, until only street glow seeps through lace curtains. In the hush, she hears the soft drip of condensation falling from a fern tip into a saucer below, a sound like distant clock ticks, yet gentler, as if time itself walks barefoot. She smiles. Those faint drops will be measured at breakfast and logged in the moisture diary, beside notes on atmospheric pressure and the temper of house cats. Diaries of this sort accumulate unread through generations, eventually sending historians into blissful stupor over columns of decimals that chart the secret weather of a single plant. Should your eyelids flutter now, let them close with the same humility as fernlets folding at dusk. Outside, the first milk cart rattles, hooves striking cobbles with sleepy percussion. Its driver, unaware of tonight's spore negotiations, hums about butter prices. The street lamps, our previous companions, fade pale against morning's ash-pink sky, yet their glass remembers the mirrored ferns within. Somewhere a church bell marks 5. And fern folklore, that toll signals the hour when dew becomes holy. Water. Gardeners slip outdoors to collect droplets on silver teaspoons, stirring them into tea for courage. Whether it works is irrelevant. Ritual itself steeps comfort. And so, dear listener, lie back beneath your own imaginary fronds. Feel the air turn damp and mild. Hear distant polkas subsiding into hush, and allow every spore-sized worry to settle onto velvet drawers, unsorted, until another gentle evening calls them forth. You might not expect the gentle bend of thin steel wire to set patent clerks murmuring like roosting pigeons. Yet here we are, leaning over the scarcely ruffled saga of the paperclip between 1899 and 1931. If you're still awake when I reach The Norwegian double loop controversy of 1912. Feel free to subscribe or simply glide into sleep like a sheet slipping from a desktop. I promise the paperwork will wait near the very end of the 19th century in an office lit by gas jets that hummed like distant beehives. An inventor named Johann Waller traced a modest oval upon ruled paper. It was not quite an oval, really more a hesitant egg with its sides politely indented. He labeled the drawing "Clip for Papers," no flourish, no bravado, then signed in ink so pale future. Archivists would squint at it through magnifying glasses that smelled faintly of dust and cucumber sandwiches. Examiners agreed the device showed promise. It required no sewing, no wax, no ribbon, merely a springy humility that pinched pages together without puncture. The patent was stamped, filed, and almost entirely ignored, while clerks returned to the more glamorous excitement of rubber stamp handles. Still, Waller's quiet coil had entered the bureaucratic bloodstream, ready to drift wherever stationary. Currents might carry it across the Atlantic. The gem manufacturing company was already producing a similar clip 2 loops rather than one, glinting in lamps like miniature spectacles left by absent-minded sprites. An early catalog boasted that the gem permitted swift gathering of ephemeral memos, a phrase so soporific that buyers nodded appreciatively before forgetting what they'd just read. Micro hook for any listener still balancing in wakefulness. The catalog also suggested paper clips could serve as impromptu cufflinks, though removal was advised before vigorous gesticulation. No sales data confirm whether anyone tried. The important thing is that the paper clip, in its gentle anonymity, was multiplying by the pound dot by 1906. Patent offices found themselves awash in slight variations. The Niagara, the Konaclip, the Owl, each name striving for drama, while the steel itself remained stubbornly tranquil. Inspectors developed a special filing drawer labeled Twists and Turns, where they stored sketches too similar to warrant rejection, but too earnest to dismiss outright. Once a month, a junior clerk removed the drawer, weighed it, and recorded the figure in a leather ledger, because knowing the precise poundage of unrealized paper clips seemed, to some supervisor, vital to progress. Ledger totals rose gently like bread dough left near a stove, yet no one ever baked the figures into anything more exciting than quarterly memos in offices further south. Summer humidity caused paper clips to leach faint streaks of rust onto letters. Secretaries discovered that wiping clips with a rag dipped in cold tea prevented discoloration. The practice spread so quietly that by 1910, nearly every mailroom reeked of tannins, creating an olfactory illusion that paperwork arrived. Steeped in afternoon refreshment, a dry humor columnist suggested serving the used tea to interns, that they might absorb clerical knowledge osmotically. Interns declined. The paper clips, however, shone modestly in the lamplight, as though grateful for their bath dot. Then came 1912 and the Norwegian double-loop dispute. A manufacturer in Trondheim insisted his clip held sheets more serenely than the British gem, claiming the inner loop functioned as a hammock where pages may repose. Solicitors on both sides exchanged letters thick with phrases like undue, torsional laxity, and overzealous curvature. The case never reached court after weeks of correspondence. Both firms realized they had accidentally been shipping each other's models in a packaging mix-up. They quietly swapped crates and issued joint statements praising international cooperation, thereby inventing the diplomatic paperclip exchange. Newspapers devoted 2 paragraphs, mostly filler between reports on tulip futures and railway timetables. Still, collectors today keep envelopes postmarked with a dispute, regarding the stamps of Trondheim and Birmingham as twin guardians of peaceful stationery. War arrived, and with it metal shortages. Office managers were instructed to salvage spent clips by straightening them with thumbnail and patience. Government pamphlets advised that a single pound of reclaimed wire could fasten. Field orders affecting no fewer than 60,000 boots. No calculation supports the number. One suspects the figure was chosen for its lulling roundness. Secretaries dutifully smoothed bent clips, stacking them like very thin soldiers awaiting redeployment. Some grew brittle, snapping into tiny hyphens that sprinkled desks. Rather than discard these fragments, thrifty letter carriers slipped them inside envelopes as improvised paper weights, an act of such microscopic economy that accountants struggled to quantify it, and thus handed it over to philosophers. When peace returned, the 1920s delivered novelty, triangular ideal clips, square cup clips, even a serpentine python clip that promised firm grip with hypnotic aesthetics. Office staff purchased boxes out of curiosity, used 2 or 3, then gravitated back to the comforting ellipse of the gem. Empty novelty boxes accumulated in supply closets, their assertive slogans fading to ghost ink. A janitor in Ohio reportedly built an entire chess set from surplus triangular clips, bending them into knights and bishops that wobbled charmingly on the board. The set survives in a local museum, displayed beside a note explaining that checkmate was seldom reached because pieces toppled in the slightest breeze. An outcome some visitors find more relaxing than decisive victories. Meanwhile, a strand of etiquette emerged. Retrieving a fallen paperclip from the floor signified discretion you had noticed, yet pretended the document never lost its dignity. To leave the clip where it fell risked gossip that one had an untidy correspondence. Magazines advised keeping a pocket clip on one's watch chain to lend aura of readiness. Illustrations showed gentlemen in bowler hats clutching telegrams, with an improbable surfeit of clips, as though mummifying their messages. Observers found the look comforting. If words threatened to escape, metal would coax them back into silence. By 1928, statisticians attempted to count global clip output. They calculated enough had been produced to encircle the equator twice, if laid end to end, an irresistible tidbit that editors headlined beside weather forecasts. School children imagined silver rings girdling Earth, glinting in sunlight, guiding migratory birds along bureaucratic meridians. Teachers, seizing the moment, assigned math problems converting clips to miles, miles to hours of horse travel, and horse hours to bushels of oats, until students slumped into desktop reverie. Paper clips thus advanced geography by inducing daydreams where maps looped back on themselves like wire. Approaching 1931, inventors filed fewer new shapes. The world had quietly agreed the original curve sufficed. Patent drawers ceased fattening. Clerks noticed the twists and turns. File felt lighter, almost lonely. One clerk's surname tore a page from the ledger and folded it into an origami fish, fastening tail with a venerable gem. He set it afloat in a rain barrel behind the office. Witnesses say the fish bobbed serenely, clip gleaming through, paper like a wink, until waterlogged words blurred into calm anonymity. Somewhere, perhaps that barrel still collects drizzle. A tiny monument to paperwork, unfiled. Today. Rummage any desk, and the paperclip remains, patient as twilight. Then, when open, it becomes a tool for ejecting SIM cards, unjamming staplers, testing soil cake texture, or, in board meetings, sculpting miniature hammocks for rubber bands. Yet in repose it clings to its quiet purpose, to hold together pages that would rather drift apart, to whisper that stories, memos, recipes, and lullabies may share a single spine for as long as necessary, and no longer than that. So, dear listener, picture a lone clip resting on your nightstand, reflecting lamplight like a crescent moon. Imagine documents of the day sliding beneath its embrace, their corners aligning with a sigh. And if your thoughts begin to wander in, gentle loops of their own, let them settle, held softly. Then, until morning loosens the wire and new pages ask for the smallest, calmest clasp. You might not expect the quiet creak of a wooden park bench to leave an archive thick enough to stump librarians, but here we are. If you're still awake when I reach the Birmingham varnish debate of 1897, feel free to subscribe or just let your eyelids droop like ivy over an iron armrest. I won't file a complaint. The story opens in the 1840s, when municipal boards across Britain and the eastern United States first commissioned public repose seats. As the ledgers so grandly called them, earlier models resembled garden furniture. Hastily deputized for civic duty, stout pine planks, roughly planed, balanced on brick piers that reminded onlookers of bread loaves gone stale. Council minutes from Huddersfield note that 3 benches were installed facing nothing in particular, a placement justified by the clerk's tidy marginalia, view of grass adequate. Carpenters received 6 pence extra for rounding the front edge, so trousers would snag less often on splinters. Still, tailors reported brisk trade in patching wool. By 1858, cast iron side frames began arriving from foundries that normally produced boot scrapers and umbrella stands. Molds bore names like Willy Fron No. 2 and patriotic scrollwork. Embellishments that made benches appear to wear lace cuffs. Some citizens protested the extravagance. One letter to the Liverpool Mercury lamented that sitting has grown vainglorious. Yet most strollers approved, discovering that scroll ended. Arms offered just enough flourish to rest a folded newspaper. Micro hook for wandering minds. An 1861 pamphlet recommended positioning scroll tips north-south to steer stray raindrops, though nobody agreed on how the American parks followed with their own flourishes, rococo swirls in Central Park, Greek keys in Philadelphia, and, briefly, a Cincinnati bench cast in the shape of 2 clasped eagles whose talons held the slats. The eagles proved alarming to small children and were quietly relocated behind a hedge, where they kept company with commemorative cannonballs, another municipal purchase that nobody quite knew how to arrange. Benches, at least, asked only to be sat upon, and thus survived pruning committees that felled exotic shrubs and relocated G, A, Z, E, B, O stot now and then. Symmetry faltered. One Glasgow bench arrived from the factory with the left arm higher than the right by exactly 3/8 of an inch, producing a charming tilt that locals nicknamed the philosopher. Poets allegedly favored it, claiming the higher elbow encouraged lofty thought. Street sweepers countered that it merely collected drips from umbrellas. After a decade of debate, the council decided to leave the philosopher unaltered and eloquent, proof that municipal indecision can itself become heritage. If you begin to yawn at this point, imagine the meetings in which aldermen compared spirit-level readings under lamplight, each reading differing by the thickness of a postage stamp. The 1870s introduced slatted backs of narrow hardwood strips. Railway companies donated offcuts from carriage interiors, which smelled faintly of shellac and cigar smoke. Installation crews discovered that hammering slats into cast iron frames produced a rhythm described by one diarist as like distant horses trotting on cobbles at dawn. Parks echoed with that sleepy percussion every spring. Children fashioned the shed shavings into makeshift mustaches, parading past pigeons in mock dignity, while nannies applauded politely. Then dozed out by 1885, paint entered the picture. Health committees, worried about damp, prescribed 2 coats of Brunswick green every 3 years. Exacting supervisors timed drying with hourglasses, though breezes conspired to add unpredictability. A gentle trivia tidbit, in Sheffield, a startled cat once left paw prints along 12 freshly painted seats, inadvertently inventing an avant-garde stripe pattern. Citizens liked the effects so much that the council attempted to repeat it using an obliging terrier. The terrier, however, refused to cooperate and the experiment was shelved with a side dot approaching the Birmingham varnish debate of 1897. Are you still with me? Manufacturers touted glossy finishes said to repel soot. Rival chemists bickered over whether benches should gleam like piano lids or remain modestly matte. Several samples were placed side by side in Cannon Hill Park. Rainwater, impartial as ever, pooled on all of them. Observers noted no dramatic difference, except that glossy seats reflected passing clouds, giving sitters the mild illusion of floating. After 6 months of inconclusive clipboard checks, the board resolved to alternate finishes, creating a sleepy checkerboard of shine and sheen that survives in old postcards. Should you wish to squint at them someday, just after the turn of the century, a new concern arose. How many people should a bench accommodate? 3? 4? The reply from Stockholm's Parks Department, precisely 3.7 adults, struck fellow bureaucrats as both rigorous and impossible. London tried marking center points with brass tacks, inviting couples to negotiate spacing. The tacks loosened over time, rolling into grass like dull golden beetles, and spacing returned to the natural law of polite shuffling. During especially crowded Sundays, strangers learned the delicate choreography of micro-adjustments, each slight slide producing that familiar, barely audible squeak part wood, part surrender. World War I strained supply chains. Iron went to munitions, hardwood to crates. Cities rehabilitated elderly benches, some dating back 70 years, tightening bolts and filling wormholes with pitch. Instructions circulated on how to weave emergency seats from interlaced willow wands. Few were built, but the pamphlet lingers in archives like a dream of furniture made from basketry. In quieter moments, you might imagine sinking into one, the willow yielding with a sigh, the war distant as a gull's cry on fog. The interwar years, ushered in concrete end stands, poured into molds that looked, from the side, like stylized thunderbolts. They weighed as much as 2 grown swans and required 4 laborers to position. Nevertheless, councils praised their anti-pilfer quality. No enterprising citizen could carry off a concrete bench under cover of night. Paint adhered poorly, flaking in charming hieroglyphs that spelled nothing. Children chipped corners to test their penknives and discovered concrete resisted narrative. It simply sat, immutable, patient, perfect for sleeping minds. By 1936, comfort crept in via ergonomics. A 2-inch backward rake, claimed one catalog, would soothe the spinal column in lotus-like concord. Another promised that alternating wide and narrow slats massaged the coat-tail region, stimulating circulation. Users mostly noticed that coins slipped more easily through the gaps, fostering a minor economy of treasure hunts involving twigs. Chewing gum and perseverance. Somewhere in a jar on a mantle, one imagines, lies a collection of such coins, each telling the unimpressed cat a sighted of afternoons long gone. War returned. Benches were again recruited, this time stripped of iron fittings to feed factories. Some parks replaced missing arms with hasty timber stumps, giving each seat an asymmetrical shrug. Citizens adjusted, perching on the remaining half-embrace without complaint. After blackout evenings, benches carried dew like shallow ponds. Lovers left initials drawn in moisture, vanishing at sunrise. Archivists cannot catalog a fog-fingered heart, yet perhaps someone remembers touching one, the wood cold, the promise warm. Peace, when it came, found benches battered but steadfast. Town planners debated whether to modernize with tubular steel, whose hollow legs whistled faintly in wind, or to restore elder wood whose grain still held echoes of Victorian footsteps. Most settled for compromise, new steel set discreetly beside, veterans of oak allowing generations to mingle in silent colonnades. A sociologist in 1952 recorded that pensioners preferred timber for its faint creak, reminding one of a house that breathes, whereas teenagers favored steel for the Speedy slide achievable when rising abruptly. Preferences, like seasons, rotated without hurry dot, and so our gentle chronicle drifts to its present moment. Somewhere, under a plane tree or sycamore, a bench awaits dusk. Its slats warm from afternoon sun, paint softened where countless shoulders have rested, screws humming almost imperceptibly as wood expands in evening cool. Perhaps you picture yourself easing down, documents set aside, listening to nothing much an indistinct rustle, a pigeon's single remark, the click of a passerby's heel. The bench accommodates all of it with the same serene indifference. Content merely to be available. If thoughts now wander like autumn leaves across pavement, let them settle on that quiet seat in the mind's park. Notice the grain beneath your palm, the faint indentation where rain lingered earlier, the comforting notion that even furniture can have a biography composed mostly of waiting. And should sleep lower its shades, imagine the whole row of benches, leaning slightly back, gazing up at stars that do not care whether varnish is glossy or matte, nor whether brass tacks stay put. They simply shine. The benches quietly approve. You perhaps drift inward, another sitter briefly at rest in the long, unhurried history of horizontal planks and patient screws. You might not expect the distance between two tiny rows of paper teeth to inspire decades of quiet deliberation, but here we are. If you're still awake by the time we reach the Belgian trial of 1.2 millimeter pin spacing, feel entirely free to subscribe or simply let sleep sneak up the way gum Arabic once crept across a sheet in a Victorian print room. No rush, no fuss, just the slow perforation of consciousness itself. Our tale begins in 1847, when the first adhesive postage stamps drifted out of London presses like neat little promises. At that moment, every stamp was trimmed by hand with scissors, an oddly ceremonial task that left postal clerks snipping all day, their wastebaskets filling with whisper-thin border slivers. Clerks compared calluses the way gardeners compare roses, and contests arose over who could free a penny black from its sheet in the straightest line. One witness noted that a veteran could sever 4 sheets a minute without audible sigh, a talent equal parts pride and tedium. Meanwhile, the broader public, blissfully unaware of these backstage snips, merely licked and sent dot by 1854. The Irish printer Henry Archer proposed punching rows of holes so sheets could be torn apart like modest theater tickets. He mounted a foot treadle machine of whirling needles inside Somerset House. The contraption was described as a hedgehog upset by clockwork. Visitors blinked at the metallic chatter, then marveled as entire panes fell into precise little squares with tufted borders. Yet every hole left a paper burr, and Archer spent evenings brushing lint from the machine's teeth with a turkey feather, more bird than engineer for those twilight minutes. Micro hook. City pigeons quickly learned that discarded chads made agreeable nesting fluff, creating, somewhere under a bridge, the plushest co-op in London. Perforation gauges emerged to measure the count of holes along 2 centimeters a weapon. 12, sometimes even 15 for the truly ambitious. These were pocket-sized metal combs, beloved by philatelists the way bakers cherish dough scrapers. One German catalog in 1863 allocated entire paragraphs to whether gauge 14 1/4 indicated. A Hamburg printing or a careless hinge replacement. Collectors fell asleep over candle stubs counting minuscule circles, waking with soot-flecked thumbs and dreams of perfect alignment. If your eyelids start to settle now, imagine those soot specks as tiny midnight planets orbiting an empire of paper rectangles. Across the Atlantic, the United States adopted a rougher approach. The Toppin Carpenter press of 1857 punched holes that looked, one critic said, like squirrels had nibbled the borders. Complaints flowed in, yet clerks appreciated that ragged edges tore quickly, saving seconds that added up to whole afternoons. By Christmas, Patent files reveal that one Mr. Yates tried a sawtooth blade instead of pins. It worked, but filled the post office with confetti, prompting janitors to lobby against further innovation. In Albany, an assistant postmaster measured the daily sweepings and concluded each letter carried away approximately 1/42nd of a teaspoon of paper. A statistic nobody requested, but he preserved anyway, perhaps for someone. Like you to ponder while drifting off. Europe, ever fond of committees, convened the first International Perforation Symposium in Paris, 1867. Delegates compared pin block layouts over tepid coffee, arguing whether the American line perforation or the British comb perforation produced kinder tears. Line perforators stabbed one direction, leaving corners solid until a second pass. Combs descended in a shape that punched three sides at once, like a hairpick descending into dough. To illustrate, a French engineer doodled croissants with bite marks technical, yet delicious. No resolution emerged beyond agreement that coffee should henceforth be served hotter. The minutes of that meeting occupy 48 pages in copperplate. Handwriting, each flourish trailing off as though the pen itself nodded mid-sentence. The 1870s brought the quest for strength. Narrow teeth pleased the eye but snapped under hurried thumbs, while broader teeth proved sturdy yet visually coarse. In Geneva, trials alternated gauges every second stamp, creating hypnotic zebra panes that postal workers jokingly called piano sheets. Sorting rooms filled with soft plunks as pieces separated themselves under gravity alone. Customers complained of finding half stamps stuck to backing paper, so the piano experiment was shelved beside other faintly musical failures, such as the perforator that hummed when gears aligned at C-sharp dot enter the adhesive quandary. As gum formulations shifted from Arabic to dextrin, moisture migrated differently through perforations. One Swedish chemist observed that gauge 13 teeth curled skyward in damp northern winters, like the whiskers of a wary cat, encouraging mischief from postal inspectors who feared machinery jams. Waxed edges were tried. They repelled damp, but offended budget committees. Eventually, Sweden settled on a moderate gauge 12, issuing a circular that urged temperance in both coffee and perforation, wisdom as suitable for lullabies as for civil service. Around 1902, the British Post Office introduced elliptical holes, two elongated ovals tucked among the circles to deter counterfeits. These subtle intruders resembled tiny fish swallowed by a shoal, unnoticed by casual senders, but thrilling to specialists who now had excuses to produce new albums with dedicated oval cutouts. Dealers claimed the ovals sang faintly if tapped by a fingernail. Skeptics tested this in hushed exhibition halls, reporting only the sound of their own breathing. Should your breathing now mirror their slow, attentive, pleasantly monochrome lit? The notion of humming ovals accompany you toward drowsiness. World War I upset supply lines again. Pin steel went to armaments and perforators were blunt. Emergency repairs replaced tempered rods with umbrella spokes, producing uneven punctures nicknamed wartime wobbles. Collectors later paid handsomely for such flaws, proof that even global turmoil could leave cozy artifacts the size of thumbnails. Between blackouts, clerks in Berlin hand-wheeled antique machines by candlelight, the rhythmic squeak a lullaby for anyone passing the corridor. One clerk wrote that the sound reminded him of crickets debating philosophy, a thought too gentle for those nights, yet preserved in his notebook like pressed lavender. The interwar period saw color phosphors applied to edges to cue sorting devices. Early tests in Mayan-stained fingertip sienna. Philatelists welcomed the extra hue, naming it machine blush. Soon the blush faded, replaced by invisible tags, and the romance drained away like ink in bleaching sunlight. Still, the perforations remained, faithful dots marching round every design king's bridges. heroic wheat sheaves marking the quiet frontier between intention and delivery. Think of them as picket fences around small illustrations, each fence post steady, each gap a portal through which sleep might slip. By 1948, automatic high-speed perforators arrived, able to puncture 40,000 stamps an hour. Engineers worried they would erase character, smoothing all wobbles into a tyranny of precision. Yet samples reveal minute variances, slight yawns where paper stretched, micro shivers where gears hesitated. Imperfections pursue humanity. Left fingerprints of imperfection, the way an immaculate pillow still holds the hollow of a resting head. Count a few such hollows, if you wish. You may lose track around 27, which is precisely the point dot, and so our perforated chronicle laps gently against the present shoreline. Modern stamps sometimes dispense with teeth entirely, favoring self-adhesive peel-outs that separate along silent die cuts. Yet even those mimic the old edge in silhouette, tiny waves in synthetic calm, paying homage to 2 centuries of holes that enabled letters to travel, lovers to speak, merchants to bill, and historians slow, slightly amused historians to ramble at bedtime. Somewhere, in a bureau drawer, lies a forgotten sheet awaiting the soft tug that sets it free, each tooth ready to yield like a sigh. Perhaps you picture running a thumb along such an edge now, feeling the rise and fall of ridges no higher than a grain of sand, yet measured, catalogued, debated, loved. Let that gentle texture accompany your breathing in, out, perforation by perforation, until thought itself tears neatly away from wakefulness, drifting, weightless, toward delivery, in the quiet postbox of sleep. You might not expect the diameter of a brass tube tied to a pigeon's ankle to determine the tempo of imperial bureaucracy, but here we are. If you're still awake when we flutter past the Swiss debate over 3.2 versus 3.3 millimeters, feel free to subscribe, or simply let your eyelids settle like feathers after a long glide. The earliest military pigeon capsules of the 1870s were improvised from cigar paper rolled into little scrolls tucked beneath a thread. Generals grumbled that rain turned the messages to pulp and pigeons returned bearing mush. Enter the Paris siege of 1870, when optician Jean-Baptiste Legrand proposed microfilming dispatches onto collodion sheets, then rolling those sheets into miniature cylinders. His first capsules were borrowed from ladies' sewing kits, tiny bobbins whose interiors smelled faintly of lavender. They fit most pigeons, but not the grander Belgian strain, whose legs were notably plump, like stout table legs in a doll's. House, clerks began weighing pigeons to assign capsule sizes, leading to ledgers of avian ankle girths. A private noted the extraordinary dignity with which a bird of large circumference tolerated a size B tube. Somewhere between those columns of numbers, the standard began to hatch. By 1885, the Prussian Postal Corps adopted nickel-silver capsules with screw tops, 28 millimeters long, and crucially, 3.0 millimeters internal width. One inspector swore that half a millimeter more created mid-air whistle, unnerving birds. Another insisted the whistle kept hawks away. Trials commenced, 10 pigeons with narrow tubes, 10 with wide. The flock returned in equal measure, but statisticians argued for days whether a tailwind of 3.4 meters per second skewed results. Micro hook and a forgotten annex. One mathematician timed the cooing frequency of each survivor, convinced wider tubes lowered pitch. His notes end mid-calculation, as though he finally dozed between decimals in enviable state. If you feel one approaching now, civilian enthusiasts soon demanded decorative flourishes. Swiss watchmakers etched snowflakes on brass, while Cairo jewelers plated capsules in dabbed gold. The Universal Pigeon Union, yes, a conference with seating charts met in Antwerp. 1893. Agenda item 4 concerned excessive ornamental protrusions. A Viennese delegate produced a capsule shaped like a Corinthian column and was gently scolded for turbulence risk. Consensus settled on plain, undecorated metal, yet city hobbyists ignored it, proving that even pigeons invited style rebels. Minutes, 73 pages, record phrases such as spirited but soporific debate, ideal words to float across your drowsy mind dot as telegraph wires multiplied. Pigeons shifted to coastal fog zones where cables failed. British lighthouse keepers favored thick-walled aluminium capsules that resisted corrosion but weighed a gram too, much by French standards. Franco-British alignment talks of 1907 traded pastry for prototypes. Engineers perched scales on a pastry box, a detail delightful yet irrelevant, precisely the sort that lulls thoughts like gentle rocking. They concluded 1.6 grams maximum weight, permitting a 25 millimeter length if alloy density exceeded 2.5. You needn't hold these figures. Let them drift by like wings in cloudy distance. Scene shift, stillness maintained. During World War I, capsule uniformity became urgent. Armies could not afford mismatched sockets on pigeon transport crates. The German field standard capsule M1916 borrowed the Prussian 3.0 millimeter, bore but added a rubber gasket that squeaked faintly when tightened. British handlers, hearing this squeak in trenches, coined them cheapers. Soldiers reported the tiny sound comforting, like toy birds singing under shell fire. Some cheapers came back dented yet intact, bearing drenched but legible film. A corporal kept one as a lucky charm, rolling it between fingers during card games. He claimed the faint gasket chirp predicted good hands, though diaries suggest he mostly lost. If your thoughts wander to the soft chirp of luckless metal, allow that wandering. It travels the same sky as our pigeons. After the war, surplus capsules flooded markets. Philatelists glued them to album covers, and children used them as secret message pods, early selfies of handwriting on onion skin paper. The League of Nations pondered a worldwide code. Capsules color-coded by continent blue for Europe, amber for Asia, jade for Africa. The palette delighted illustrators but alarmed chemists, who warned that dyes leached in rain, tinting birds' legs turquoise. Trials with harmless wax coatings failed because wax melted in Moroccan summers. Eventually, the plan was shelved in a drawer marked Future Harmony, still awaiting some clerk's rediscovery. Drawers have a way of waiting quietly, perhaps. Like you, nestling deeper into blankets as the story breezes on dot by 1930. Tooling advances produced screw-less snap caps. The Swiss Click 30 clicked shut with a soft pop. Breeders loved the swift closure. Birds seemed indifferent. An advertising leaflet claimed the pop mimicked the reassuring crack of sunflower seeds. No ornithologist confirmed this, but sales soared. Collectors debate whether early Click 30s measured precisely 29.8 millimeters manufacturing shrinkage that renders them rare. Imagine a row of hobbyists with calipers, heads bowed, the hush broken only by an occasional satisfied sigh. Measurements lull even the most restless mind. They repeat, dependable as heartbeats. Storm clouds again. World War II revived pigeon service under cody names. Britain's Operation Columba, Germany's Tall. Capsule specification SN13 called for cellulose acetate bodies, transparent, so message presence was visible without opening. Unfortunately, transparency revealed condensation, beating like tiny planets on film. Allied labs tested silica sachets scaled to pea size, but pigeons pecked at the beads, mistaking them for millet. Designers reverted to opaque black bakelite, which clacked softly when dropped, evidently acceptable in bomb-proof rooms where silence was relative. Handlers logged every clack in duty rosters, lines of 1 clack 314 hours that now read like minimalist poetry. Feel free to recite clack in your mind on a slow exhale. It works as well as counting sheep, perhaps better. Post-war airspace filled with radio waves and pigeon services dwindled. Yet capsule debates persisted at hobby fairs where retirees compared anodized hues under fluorescent lights. The 1952 Bologna show granted a ribbon to the lightest capsule, a magnesium alloy model weighing 0.9 grams. Though judges fretted it might crumble if stepped on by a careless pigeon, a scenario statistically negligible but endlessly discussable over espresso. Meanwhile, junior exhibitors prized heft. One 9-year-old glued a lead fishing weight inside his entry to make it feel important. The ploy was discovered only when a judge's arm grew tired mid-inspection. Nobody scolded him. The child later dozed atop his display, dreaming presumably of weightless birds. As we circled toward modern times, the International Federation of Pigeon Fanciers now recognizes 2 capsule classes: historic, metal, screw, and contemporary, polymer, snap. Proposed electronic capsules with GPS chips were deemed beyond the philosophical remit of avian message bearing, a phrase echoing through committee halls like gentle thunder. Instead, enthusiasts focus on nostalgic flights, releasing birds with blank paper, acknowledging that the act itself is the message. One flyer, asked why his capsules contain nothing, replied, "Silence arrived safely." And so the standard 3.0 millimeters or thereabout persists, not from necessity but affection. A numerical lullaby cooed across generations. Picture a pigeon loft at dusk, rows of quiet birds, each sporting a tiny cylinder that scarcely disturbs. The contour of a feather. The setting sun glints on brass, gold, bakelite, echoing faintly in your thoughts. Perhaps you trace the circle of that diameter with your thumb upon the sheet, gentle pressure rounding into calm. Let the measured smallness of it soothe. Let distances compress until even tomorrow feels close enough to fold, tuck, and send on a soft winged carrier to the realm of dreams. You might not expect the exact curvature of a Victorian teaspoon bowl to inspire 4 decades of parliamentary paperwork, but here we are. If you're still awake by the time we drizzle into the 1899 argument over whether a rounded spoonful could be legally flatter than 3 barleycorns tall, feel free to subscribe, though honestly, don't strain yourself. Even the clerks nodded off mid-debate. Early cookbooks in the 1830s treated a teaspoon as a mood rather than a measure. Mrs. Beeton, writing later, tried to pin it down by printing an illustration, yet printers rescaled the image to suit margins, and every new reprint altered national porridge density. To calm chaos, the British Board of Trade convened the Weights and Measures, Minor Domestic Utensils Subcommittee in 1864. They met on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. because tea was already brewed and spoons were conveniently present. Minute 1 recorded that no 2 teaspoons in the room matched. Minute 2 recommended further meetings. A junior assistant dutifully logged bowl widths to the nearest 16th of an inch, then fell into a pleasant doze, quill poised like a sleepwalker's. Wound up by 1871, the working definition settled at 1 fluid dram, which sounded medical and therefore comforting. Alas, a dram filled to the rim sloshed, while a dram heaped like a tiny sand dune spilled sugar onto saucers. The Royal Society of Chemistry sent a politely stern letter advising that surface tension varied by syrup type. Parliament responded with Draft Bill 42B, an act concerning concavity. Its first clause prescribed a bowl radius of 0.79 inches, but the typesetter's numeral 9 smudged into 8, slicing capacity by nearly a tenth. Proofreaders caught the error only after 10,000 copies circulated, thus birthing the half-dram panic of 72. Grocers stuck handwritten disclaimers near plum jam barrels. Our teaspoons are of the larger persuasion. If that footnote relaxes your shoulders, allow it. Disclaimers often resemble lullabies for the anxious. Meanwhile, Silversmiths in Sheffield sensed opportunity. They produced regulation teaspoons, stamped with a tiny crown and the letters TSP. Collectors still hunt them, tilting each one to spy the crown, which looks remarkably like a sleepy hedgehog if you squint. Reports reached the board that counterfeit spoons bore upside-down crowns. Crowns missing spikes, even crowns sporting monocles. In quiet chambers, officials compared hedgehog silhouettes by candlelight, the wax shortening with each inspection until decisions dimmed into drowsy resignation. At one memorable sitting, a member suggested simplifying everything to a dollop, then immediately apologized, explaining he had mistaken the discussion for his grandmother's rice pudding instructions. Across the Atlantic, Americans formed their own teaspoon league, advocating exactly 4 cubic centimeters metric, modern, marvelously tidy. British newspapers derided this as continental teaspoonery, yet pharmacists embraced it because milliliters behaved peacefully in ledgers. A pamphlet titled How Small Was Sweet Enough included a chart converting drams to cubic inches. Tablespoons, desert spoons, and, charmingly, the average raindrop caught on a thumb. One might count those thumb drops now instead of sheep, if sleep sidles near. Scenes shift, yet our spoon glimmers on. In 1883, the Earl of Grantham hosted a tasting to test bitterness thresholds in quinine syrup. 16 spoons, identical in weight, differed only in bowl depth by half-millimeter increments. Guests, gown-sleeved and half-board, sipped in. Sequence while a footman rang a bell each minute. The medical observer noted no consensus on bitterness, but clear consensus on fatigue. Several noble heads lolled gracefully by spoon 9. His final report concluded, fatigue may be an instrument of compliance. If you feel the same agreeable heaviness, you are scientifically aligned with aristocracy. Standardization pressed. On the 1898 teaspoon measurements. Act finally fixed capacity at precisely 4/23 of a cubic inch. Why not simply 4 cubic centimeters? Because, according to anecdote, the clerk drafting the bill used a borrowed slide rule calibrated for pipe organ construction. Pipe lengths became spoon volumes through sleepy arithmetic, and no one objected. Perhaps they too were lulled by pipe organ drones. Publishers of household almanacs printed conversion tables and margins, where readers absent-mindedly doodled. One surviving copy shows a cat sketched beside 4/23 CUN, the cat yawning theatrically. Even marginalia participates in our theme. Manufacturers grumbled that filing new molds cost money, yet marketeers rejoiced. Official teaspoon inside. Banners fluttered in shop windows. Shoppers, unsure whether old spoons were suddenly criminal, tucked them in drawers like contraband relics. Thus arose the great drawer of misfit spoons. Every kitchen has one, rattling softly when foraged at midnight. If you recall that muffled clink, let it echo faintly. Memory clinks are percussion for dreams. During the First World War rationing, officers inspected mess halls armed with calibrated spoons on chain lanyards. Soldiers nicknamed them swinging gallants. An eyewitness recounts a sergeant dipping the lanyard spoon into cocoa, declaring the portion rebellious by a single grain, then shrugging, for trains were late and snow fell sideways. The single grain melted anyway, as rogue grains tend to do. Administrative letters filed this under non-actionable deviations, a phrase so soothing it could be whispered like meditation, non-actionable deviations again and again, until eyelids obey gravity. Returned, taste sweetened, and coffee houses flirted with slightly larger, modern teaspoons. Advert copy promised frothier foam via expansive concavity. In response, the Ministry of Food issued Clarification Circular 12A. True teaspoons remained immutable, though cafes might offer stirring spoons of optional amplitude. Circular 12A closes with a line, "This distinction shall not trouble the public, which is perhaps the most optimistic sentence in bureaucratic history. Still, most patrons sipped happily, the definition hovering unseen above saucers like a mild halo dot. In 1954, the BBC aired a 5-minute segment titled The Teaspoon in History. Narrated in deep baritone, listeners reportedly found it restful, yet strangely specific. One caller asked whether the teaspoon's apex signaled the end of Victorian exactitude. The host paused 9 seconds of silence and replied, "It signals nothing terribly urgent." Radios continued humming. Many listeners forgot to switch them off and drifted into night, accompanied by faint static and the ghost of measurement. Today's international standards. Organization quietly upholds 5 milliliters, which differs yet again, though nobody storms. Parliament about it. Recipe bloggers hedge with phrases like scant teaspoon or generous teaspoon, reflecting eternal human elasticity. Silicon Valley startups toy with smart spoons that light up when level. Venture capital yawned. After prototype 3, in home kitchens, cereal bowls still welcome whatever volume the nearest spoon conveys, and breakfasts proceed unscathed. Somewhere a silver heirloom holds precisely 4/23 cubic inches, but oatmeal doesn't mind rounding. Numbers, having done their duty, recline dot so the teaspoon, standard yet fluid, keeps stirring without fuss. Imagine one now, resting on a saucer metal warm from tea, concave moon cradling a single reflected lamplight. The edge traces a circle smaller than a coin, large enough to carry sweetness, exact enough for papers, yet soft enough for dreams. Let that tiny hollow hold the last of today's questions. When it empties, it will still weigh exactly itself. And you may drift precisely somewhere between dram and milliliter, measured only by the calm of your breath. You might not expect a rickety wooden kiosk on a rain-slicked Victorian curb to influence contractual law, municipal drainage, and the etiquette of puddle avoidance for half a century. But here we are. If you're still upright by the time, I meander to the 1873 debate over whether a damp canopy counted as returned in fair condition. Feel free to subscribe though, truly do keep reclining. Umbrella ledgers have an uncanny way of closing eyelids without effort. VelvetHist. Trace of organized umbrella renting drifts in with a drizzle over 1806 London. A bookseller named Augustus Tripp, observing umbrellas propped inside his doorway like startled black bats, began lending them for a halfpenny the quarter hour, 2 pence should you saunter. He logged usage in a school exercise book, drawing tiny rain clouds beside late returns. Local clerks, weary of soaking wig powder, approved. Soon Tripp's booth sprouted opposite St. Paul's, a squat affair of tarred planks that smelled faintly of boiled onions because, economical as ever, he reused soup barrels for walls. Even that homely scent drifted into regulation. A pamphlet cautioned renters to air umbrellas lest garments absorb unbecoming allium. Imagine city air spiced with faint onion and horse dung. Cobbles glistening like fish scales, details expand, humor peaks. Then we wander calmly on dot by. 1822, at least 6 rivals operated along Fleet Street. Competition hinged on handle variety, bamboo for ladies, stout ash for solicitors, a whimsical whalebone spiral marketed as the Tempest corkscrew. Booth keepers bewailed split canopies, so the worshipful company of basket makers proposed. A deposit system, 1 shilling exactly, tucked into a felt pouch tied to each handle. Deposits jingled like pocket lullabies, luring sparrows that pecked the knots loose. Twice, birds absconded with pouches, leading the Times to print the first recorded phrase, umbrella crime wave, which rather overstates 2 thieving finches. Still, finch larceny lightened proceedings. A micro hook fluttering past before we settle again into drizzle dot records show the average rental lasted 16 minutes, enough to dash between drapers and dairy stands. People timed errands to the quarter-hour bell of St. Dunstan in the west, sprinting at the 12th chime to avoid an extra halfpenny. One ledger lists a Mr. P. Quill returning breathless, declaring the bell struck early. The keeper, annotated client disputes horology, granted lenity, advised better shoes. Such soft admonitions compiled into a booklet, the courteous Brawley, circulated free with every 10th rental. Its final page advised, return dry if weather permits, else tender apology damp as the day. Apologies as measurements and other. Softly absurd calibration to pocket for later dreams. Railway expansion in the 1840s sprinkled umbrella depots along platforms. Tickets, trunks, and tarpaulins jostled. A sign at Euston proclaimed, "Worry not, your umbrella awaits." Station masters insisted on brass tags, stamped with sequential numbers, so that an umbrella left at Paddington could be redeemed in Bristol without dispute. Of course, tags tarnished, digits blurred, and passengers collected strangers' umbrellas as souvenirs. A pensioner wrote to Punch magazine describing a collection of 38 mismatched canopies. "My hallway resembles a retiring regiment of bats." Punch replied with a sketch of umbrellas saluting, their tips planted like pikes, mildly amusing, mildly pointless, entirely conducive to bedtime. Scene texture shifts, but pace stays unhurried. In 1857, Paris adopted the system under the chic term parapluie bureau. Houseman's new boulevards encouraged strolling, yet sudden downpours turned promenades into reflective ribbons. Rentals there included a complimentary calling card printed with waterproof ink. Romantic souls pretended fate guided matching. Cards back together under one umbrella, though evidence suggests mostly soggy handshakes and minute surcharges. A municipal edict fixed canopy color respectable black, but milliners rebelled by knotting discreet ribbons at the feral peacock blue, dusty mauve, a wink of rebellion under monochrome skies. If color flickers behind your closed eyes, now let it. Ribbons ripple softly until they blur to gray again. Back in London, the 1861 flooding inquiry blamed overflowing gutters partly on abandoned rentals clogging drains. Parliament considered compulsory tether chains for umbrellas, modeled after library reading lamps. The proposal failed when an MP absent-mindedly entangled himself mid-speech, toppling lectern and dignity alike. Hansard recorded polite laughter of moderate duration, then, wonderfully, a recess for tea. No chain law ensued. Instead, keepers added chalkboards tallying unreturned stock, numbers arching like sleepy arithmetic. One chalkboard survives in a museum storeroom, the final figure frozen at 473. A quiet cliffhanger nobody minds resolving. The zenith arrived with the 1870 Umbrella Assurance Act, allowing renters to purchase rain indemnity at 1 penny per hire. A stamped green ticket promised reimbursement for any garment rendered unpresentable by meteorological surprise. Insurance clerks evaluated claims by comparing damp patches to silhouettes in an illustrated chart. Drizzle haze, spatter bloom, full-bodied soak. Payouts were tiny a dry cleaning chit, a fresh collar, but bureaucracy ballooned. Filing cabinets multiplied. Clerks dozed atop them during night storms, lulled by pattering roofs and endless forms marked precipitation. Category: should your limbs feel cabinet heavy now, blame precipitation B. Electric tramlines in the 1880s extended errand radius. Umbrella return rates plummeted. Marketing pivoted. Kiosks offered evening hire, encouraging patrons to keep umbrellas. Overnight for sunrise drop-off, rationalizing absence with the phrase, resting at home like any guest. Households obliged by leaning rentals near hearths, where heat warped ribs, producing lopsided canopies the next morning. Kiosks introduced a sleep over surcharge, and there it sits, history's gentlest oxymoron. Surcharges seldom startle. When whispered, try mouthing it sleep, over surcharge, and notice drowsiness stir like steam from cocoa. Transatlantic steamer lines briefly adopted umbrella hire between gangway and carriage. A surviving log from SS Arania lists weather. On 12 crossings, 7 drizzly, 3 foggy, 2 mizzling, a word ship's pursers favored because it sounded like muttered fizz. Umbrellas at sea tasted of salt. Canvas mildew formed pale constellations nicknamed deck galaxies. Passengers traced them with gloved fingers, inventing nautical star signs such as the dripping boot or the perpetual delay. Constellations. That guide nowhere perfect. Nightlights for the nodding mind. The twilight of umbrella renting arrived quietly with the cheap, steel-ribbed penny brolly of 1895. Ownership undercut higher. Kiosks downsized, then vanished like puddles after sunbreak. One final booth outside the British Museum persisted until 1907, tended by Miss Euphemia Dawes, who reportedly sang raindrop counts under her breath. A student jotted her refrain, 31. 32, the mummies stay dry, how about you? When new terrazzo paving improved drainage, footfall sidestepped the booth and Euphemia retired, gifting stray umbrellas to children who used them as improbable sails across windy squares. Her kiosk became a planter for geraniums, crimson blooms where black canopies once clustered as suitable epilogue, though our narration drifts past rather than resolves. Today, only traces remain, a brass tag in a junk drawer, an over-polite, clause and rail bylaws, perhaps an inherited canopy whose handle bears faint rental numerals. Fabric sighs when unfurled, ribs creak like soft knuckles, and rain remembers to fall exactly as before. If you picture that umbrella now open but motionless indoors, a private cloud held at arm's length, you might hear bygone clerks marking quarter hours, Finch's scheming deposits, Euphemia counting drops. Their murmurs overlap until they shape a hush broad enough to stand beneath, gentle enough for sleep. Stay there as long as you like. The rental period is mercifully indefinite, and late fees have long since washed away. You might not think the small, slightly ragged paper pocket glued to the inside cover of a library book could launch committees, influence adhesives, and spur a transatlantic quarrel over gum Arabic viscosity. But here we are. If you're somehow still awake by the time I arrive at the 1954 debate on whether a pocket's upper lip should fold at 15 degrees or a daring 16, you're welcome to subscribe, though truly, I suspect your eyelids will have reached their own consensus long before that angle is resolved. The very first traceable card pocket appears in 1842 at the Boston Mercantile Library, when a volunteer named Mrs. Temperance Wilcox decided borrowers should check themselves in. She pasted folded scraps of tea-stained ledger paper inside volumes of maritime law and slid handwritten tickets behind them. The experiment lasted a rainy week before humidity urged the pockets to unpeel and flutter like moth wings each. Time a book opened. Mrs. Wilcox responded by supplementing the paste with a dab of molasses sweet, but, alas, irresistible to silverfish. An incident report records 2 pages perished beneath an unseemly sugar siege. Even so, the vision held, a humble sleeve guarding circulation certainty, almost as comforting as a bookmark, but altogether more OFFICIOUS. By 1867. The idea had drifted to Manchester's Free Reference Library, where the head librarian, Mr. Elijah Cottam, commissioned sturdy pockets cut from surplus railway timetables. The timetable's peppermint green tint looked modern, he said, while the reverse still displayed minute print. Departure times glimmered faintly behind checkout cards, lending every history tome the ghost of an express to Leeds. Users complained they dreamt of missed trains after reading. Cottam, ever pragmatic, ordered the next batch printed on beige. Beige made no one dream, but the ink slid content smudged fingertips. and an etiquette pamphlet advised patrons to carry a handkerchief, lest schedules stain. A very small worry, drifting like coal dust through our minds before settling into nothing at all. Across the Atlantic. 1883 Baltimore adopted silk fiber pockets treated with alum to deter mildew. They crackled when touched, producing a sound likened to distant frying pans. Children loved the noise. Scholars loathed it. One professor of Greek tragedy maintained the crackle spoiled his meter. He proposed pockets of kid leather, soft, silent, extravagant, but the city's budget preferred paper. So a compromise emerged, a cotton rag blend dipped in a thin starch bath. These opened with only the faintest sigh, a gentler rustle suited to owlish midnights in the stacks. If you imagine that sigh now, paper breathing once before going still, you may find your own breath matching its slowness. Card systems matured, and with them the pockets. The 1901 International Library Conference in Brussels devoted an entire afternoon to their dimensions. Delegates measured samples with brass calipers, arguing whether a card should protrude precisely 1/16 of an inch for easy extraction or nestle flush to forestall dust. The minutes note that after a tea break, both factions forgot where. They stood and voted unanimously for reasonable visibility, an immortal phrase meaning absolutely nothing, perfect for bedtime. Library supply catalogs nonetheless printed diagrams showing caliper lines and heroic arrows, indicating the path of an imaginary borrower's thumb. The thumb always looked calm, its nail tidily shaped, a miniature reassurance that even minor gestures could be diagrammed into order. Glue technologies followed fashion. Early fish skin glues emitted a shoreline tang during warm months. Staff opened windows, letting catalog cards flutter like seagulls across desks. In 1927, a chemical outfit from New Jersey offered a synthetic adhesive called Quiet Bond, advertised to hush the odor and hasten the bond. Trials revealed it set so fast pockets tilted sideways before librarians could adjust them, leaving generations of books with pockets listing gently like sleepy ships. Patrons tilted their heads in sympathy, leading to a tiny rise in stiff neck. Complaints recorded by a cautious medical journal. The remedy, suggested one doctor, was slower glue or brisker reading. Brisk reading never caught on in reference sections. Slower glue, fortunately, did. The Second World War imposed rationing on manila stock. British libraries salvaged correspondence envelopes, trimming away the gummed edges. Thus some philosophy texts bore pockets lined with the faint shadows of censored phrases, black rectangles redacted by wartime scissors. Borrowers idly traced the shapes, inventing suppressed secrets, jam shortages, troop deployments, perhaps merely Aunt Mildred's fruitcake recipe deemed too decadent for paper. Such silent conjectures passed the time until sleep crept in, then toppled quietly over the arm of the chair. Post-war optimism birthed color once more. The 1950 American Library Association meeting in Des Moines unveiled pockets in 11 hues: canary, mint, rose, even a daring graphite. Surveys showed readers preferred mint for poetry, graphite for engineering. A library in Fresno tested seasonal rotation pastel for spring, russet for autumn, until staff grew weary of matching catalog tabs. They reverted to neutral wheat, concluding color exceeded informational requirements. Wheat persists today, a faintly toasted shade neither here nor there, as reassuringly bland as warm milk. By the late 1960s, murmurs of barcode automation threatened the pockets. Rain. Yet engineers conceded borrowers still enjoyed the tactile slide of card into sleeve, a ritual like clocking out of daily haste and clocking into contemplative hush. So hybrid volumes bore both pocket and code. One could hear faint beeps at the counter, followed by the whisper thunk of card returning home, two sounds overlapping like lullaby harmony. In certain memories, they still echo, each beat fading a little slower than the last thunk, until both dissolve in the soft whir of climate control. The end, when it arrived, was courteous. During the 1984 Midwinter Librarians Roundtable, a motion passed to phase pockets out with dignity. Remaining supplies were to be used in low circulation Works County agricultural bulletins, volumes of parliamentary debates from forgotten sessions, bound pamphlets on the ideal spacing of asparagus rows. For these lonely books, pockets remained, faithful even as laser scanners flickered beyond the desk. One custodian compared them to quiet grandparents at a digital christening, grandparents who sit, smile, and eventually nod off much as we hope you are doing now. A few libraries still paste new pockets for special collections requiring anonymity rare diaries, local bird-watching logs, slim volumes of poetry that blush at electronic scrutiny. In a Munich archive, artisans cut pockets from archival rag, sew their edges with linen thread, and affix them using wheat starch paste stirred 8,000 times for perfect translucence. They claim the paste's rhythm matters. 8,000. Strokes resemble the turning of pages across a human lifetime. Count far enough and counting itself grows drowsy, the numbers lining up like chairs at closing time. Perhaps you own a second-hand book bearing a pocket. Inside you may find the last borrower's card still tucked there, stamped in purple with dates marching back decades, each line a small doorway. Trace them slowly, 12 APR 79, 7 Joule 81, 16 Jan 92. Notice gaps, widening like sleepy breaths. Someone's handwriting presses harder in winter, lighter in spring. A smudge of ink equals a sneeze, or a raindrop shaken free during a hurried dash to the bus. All those faint marks, tiny as dust motes, keep drifting long after the room grows. Still, they drift now behind your eyelids, settling on the shelves of your own quiet thought stop, so the pocket endures. Modest yet precise, 2 seams, 1 opening, limitless silence. It asks nothing more than that a card slide in, rest, and slide out again, like a tide confident it will return. Tonight, imagine a horizon of books, every cover cracked just enough to show a slim wheat-colored pocket waiting. No urgency. No cue, only the gentle possibility of borrowing, of bringing something home, of returning whenever you're ready. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in a dream. The library is open all night there. Slips of paper brief beneath calm paste, and the next stamp is yours whenever you wish to wake and collect it. Until then, let the hush close over the shelves, over the pockets, over you, folding time as softly as a card disappearing into its sleeve.